Morning, everyone, and welcome to another Jump webinar recruitment discussion. This week, we're going to be talking and looking at technology. Tech is a huge, huge subject, and I'm sure I could fill numerous webinars on tech. But as I've said on a number of occasions, the digital wave is coming, and you have a choice. You swim out and ride the wave and see what's happening, or you sit on the beach and wait for the wave to break. And what will happen when it breaks? It will break over the top of you and sweep you away unless you get involved in tech. As technology advances, it's constantly changing and evolving, and we now see in every aspect of our life. But recruitment, traditionally, we've been very slow at embracing tech. And to me, that technological advancement is what's going to be the biggest change that's coming over the next 5 years. According to some reports, 33% of HR professionals have said seeing AI in their daily activities is becoming more and more apparent. What with CV screening, CV production, behavioral profiling, parsings, the CRM, accounts, chatbots, lead generation, marketing, data, video communication. I think you get the gist. Tech is speeding up our processes and cutting down our human error. Recruitment or recruiting talent is going to be the single biggest objective for every business right across the globe. And we as recruiters are right at the sharp end of that recruitment process. So those who embrace change and adapt it, thank you, Mr. Darwin, will survive. However, those who do not embrace change, the question is, how long will you survive? So there are parts of recruitment that genuinely need automation. However, back to the sharp end of recruitment, at the end of the day, clients rarely see what we actually do as a recruitment job. They only see part of the role. But there will always be that human interaction, that human element that means there's going to be two sides of recruitment. What we automate, the mundane, the routine, the time-consuming parts of recruitment, versus the human side of recruitment, where we're talking about actually shaping and delivering the end product to our client. So we need to interact now, or we're going to start to head towards an issue where technology takes over and we spend less time speaking to our clients and less time speaking to our candidates, and those that have the right technology stack in that can then spend more time speaking to their clients and their candidates, they will start to gain the objective. So it's not about the tech, it's about how we use the tech. So today, Mr. Jacobs is on his way to Malta to see a client. Mr. Pye is on a new client site. So I'm joined by Mr. Paul Sharp and Heather Sorway. So what we can get is a great understanding from the front office, sales side, Mr. Sharp and myself, and from the back office side, from Heather and what's going on. And what we're looking at is the processes that will make the boat go faster. So first question, then I always think it's good to start off with something that's challenging. Why do we think recruitment companies are slow at picking up new technologies? And really, they pick it up only when they're forced to. So why is it that we think that recruitment agencies are slow at picking up tech?
Thanks, Hyde. I'll dive in, and thanks for referring to the recruitment industry as the sharp end of recruitment. I'm assuming that's after my surname as opposed to being at the coalface.
It was definitely sharp without an E there, Mr. Sharp.
Okay, I'll take both. I think it's a really interesting question. I just want to relay just a really quick story. I can remember back in the 80s, these little flat disc things coming out and people saying that it would replace vinyl, and me thinking that they were absolutely bonkers to think that. I can then remember the internet coming out in the 90s and people saying that it would be available to everybody, and me thinking it would be only available to businesses. So these are technological advancements that happen, and we can't stop them. So you've either got to embrace them, and I think I've learned to embrace them more as I've got older, rather than fighting against them or thinking they're not going to happen. And I think part of that comes back to a mindset thing, Howard, for me. Sometimes we go into looking at things thinking they're actually not going to work. And so then we look for the reasons why it won't work, as opposed to the reasons why it actually will work. So I think first and foremost, I think there's a real mindset challenge there for us recruiters. And we're all really busy people, right? So the second bit for me is taking time out to look at new technology is not something that is always high up on the agenda. And as we all know, when you start looking at one technology, it's like opening up Pandora's box, isn't it? All these other technology platforms that do the same thing, come into the picture. And then before you know it, you can't see the wood for the trees for the wood because you've got so many different platforms to look at. So I think sometimes it's a mindset, sometimes it's priorities, and sometimes it's just, I'd rather leave that door closed and not open it up. I don't know whether you'd agree, Heather.
I completely agree. I think we assume that a technology project is just that, a technology project, when in fact it's a change project. And so people are historically uncomfortable with change. As people, there are some people who embrace change, but generally people like to do things as Howard Slide, he's just put up, we've always done it this way. People are reluctant to change, and successful technology projects involve embracing that change. And I think that the plan is that we'll come on and talk about that later on in the webinar. But if you haven't got that mindset that says this is to the benefit of our organization, this needs to be done, this needs time investing in it, and as recruiters, we're massively busy. We're too busy to focus on doing this properly and to do these strategic things, because especially at the moment, we've got all these vacancies to fill, we've got all these candidates to find, and it's hard. And so to devote the amount of time that's needed to do this properly, you've got to really believe it's going to make a difference. And that's the mindset piece.
So you've just mentioned something there about it being strategic. Do you think then sometimes this is because we don't see technology as part of a strategy? We don't have a strategy for technology, so therefore it tends to be more reactionary, or we need or we've seen, rather than actually we've got a plan, we understand what our priorities are for the year, and therefore we've got a plan to invest that time in those one or two, three things that we know are absolutely business critical. Do you think that therefore there's a disconnect?
Absolutely.
I think the disconnect happens, Paul, is that people don't understand the price of time. And what I mean by that is the cost it takes you. Let's just take, I remember going to a client numerous years ago, and they were talking about, why should I put in an electronic timesheeting system? They had 100+ contractors out there. They had a person coming in 2.5 days a week to do their timesheeting, etc. They were having around about 25% error. And, we actually went out to the CRM provider, and with the CRM provider, we created a brand new timesheeting portal for them. When we implemented that, guess what? It took 25 minutes a week to run that payroll. So that's 2.5 days saved of someone's time. It reduced our errors by 100%. We had 0 errors. And the cost of that time is huge. We could then invest that time to putting people actually more client facing and candidate facing. And to me, it's the fear of the unknown, the lack of understanding of what time costs us. And the comment there that I put up here, and I distinctively looked for a comment, and I was so pleased when I saw this comment that we've always done it this way, because that's one of the biggest bugbears I have in recruitment, when people say we've always done it this way. Well, yeah. I keep saying there's no...
Sorry, Howard.
I was going to say there's no wrong and right ways to recruit. There are only better ways to recruit. So if we're always looking then from a technology point of view, how we can find those better ways to recruit, then we start to actually upskill our business to be able to cope with the modern world and create a better product for our end client. Are you going to say?
I think, Howard, it links to what Paul's saying about strategy. Have you thought about technology in terms of your strategy? So if you have a growth strategy, to use your example, your paper timesheet system might work today, but is it going to work for you tomorrow? Is it scalable? And does it fit with your strategic growth plans? And so I think that people are more likely to think about technology and the improvements and the cost of time and the investment if it's linked to some of the strategic goals that they have for the organization, and they thought about the technology and how that impacts their path to whatever their goal is.
I think
100%.
what we're saying is that we're not viewing technology as an enabler. We're viewing technology as an added extra or a bonus that we could put into the business, where it should be seen as an enabler to the business, and therefore there should be an agenda on what we're doing with technology and how technology should be used. So here's the next question then. So what areas of recruitment, and it's the areas of recruitment that I'm looking at, could benefit from technological advancements?
I think this is really interesting because I think that you've got to keep an eye on what's going on in the market at all times. So there's going to be a different answer to this depending on the business that you're in, the sector you're in, where you're at with technology at the moment, and where you're starting from before you even think about where you're getting to. So I think it's really important to keep an eye on what's going on in the market, and not to just assume that what you've got's okay. You've got to have an eye to developments, because this stuff is developed really fast and implemented really fast. And if you're not talking to other recruitment businesses about what they're doing, and you're not sharing information and networking and talking to technology businesses, it's difficult to keep an eye on what it is, because the reality is every part of recruitment can benefit from technological advancement. And it's working out for you from your starting point, what are the bits that are going to add value, move you towards your strategic goal, and are therefore worth investing time in. So I'm sure there are some specific examples that you two know about. But for me, it's where am I now? What have I got in place now? What are my goals? What technology am I going to need to change or add in to get me where I want to be?
Yeah, 100%. And I think also it's where is time spent delivering tasks that could be done by a different process or a piece of technology that would free individuals up to do the activities that are harder, or they need more personal skills rather than process skills. So for me, anything that you can map out and predict to a degree, then I think anything's fair game. And in terms of technology, so anything that you can build a workflow, you can probably build a piece of technology, or there's probably a piece of technology out there that can already do that. And this isn't just the front end, it's the back end as well. So whether that be raising contracts of employment or having all your HR data in one place, it's the same principle as sourcing candidates or connecting with people. So anything that for me involves volume or things that can be built into a workflow, those are probably the two buckets that I'd probably pick on in terms of a definition. Then I think those areas are up for technology from a personal perspective. But I don't think it's just back end, it's just front end. I think anything's fair game if you can predict it.
So I think it's interesting, isn't it, that when we start to talk about the benefits of technology advancement, we've hit on the sort of the nail on the head. Which parts are the mundane, repeatable parts of recruitment that technology could improve? And what Heather's talking about is where are you on your cycle and what can you add into that? And I think that's where we talk about never being process proud, but never be process satisfied, but never process proud. Always change. Look at how we can develop that process. Look what we can change on that process. What can we do that gives our opportunity to interact where the most vital part of recruitment is? And if we start to think about that and say, if we look at, say, and when I started to sort of think about this process, I went back to when I started recruitment in the early 90s. I spent 90% of my time on the phone, talking to my clients and talking to my candidates. I spent 10% of my time sifting through paper CVs, sifting through stuff so I could actually find and call people to find out what they were doing. If we look at it now, it's probably flipped, not sort of flipped completely, but it has flipped, where we spend more time sorting and sourcing electronically and going through job boards, etc., rather than actually calling. So anything that can take that mundane work priority out and then say, right, can I change that priority to the priority of calling and speaking to people, because that's where you make your money. You don't make your money at the search, you make your money evaluating the search and therefore putting the right product in front of your client, but you make more money when you understand what your client actually wants. So therefore, if we can change our technology to take that part away so we can be more client facing, they're the areas I'd start to change straight away.
Yeah, I think for me, Howard, I've always, well, let me start with one example. I have invested in AI. Just before I joined Jump, I spent the best part of 28 grand on one of the latest bits of AI kit coming out of America. It was a disaster. And it was a disaster for one simple reason. The CRM was not in the right, one, it wasn't the latest version, but second, it wasn't in the right shape and form to be able to, take data out and automate the process. So one of the key bits for me around technology is getting your engine sorted out and making sure that CRM is really robust and it's working for you, because you can't do much with it. You'll be putting little bits of sticky plaster on it if you try and plug anything in, or you try and automate something outside of the CRM. So getting that CRM bit is really key. And you and I, we've talked a lot, haven't we, to some of our clients about making sure that CRM is fit for purpose and it's all in order before you do anything going forward. Once you then have got that in place, then I think there are bits that you can automate, and particularly around the sourcing and connecting with people, or pushing your voice out to many people and being heard by many. So moving from marketing being a one-to-one to a one-to-many, I think there are some great tools out there that can actually help and do that. And I've been on a call this morning with a product that does something similar with LinkedIn. So it automates the message, it personalizes it, but it automates it, enables you to create a company community of people from everybody in the business. All their network comes into one community. And even if the individual leaves the company, all their profiles and contacts stay in one place. So it protects the IP for the business going forward. That was always an issue for me when people sort of leave the company. So anything where it's volume, where you can mass market, mass reach, you can connect with loads of people, you can start to have many conversations, which then frees you up to have the quality conversations, which I think is what you're alluding to. So it's the high-end stuff where we need to spend more time. The lower-end stuff you can automate. By the way, you don't even have to automate, you can outsource. And you two both know that we have recently worked with a handful of clients where they were very reluctant to outsource, but they now think outsourcing is a really great tool to get rid of some of that work. At some point, technology will replace it, I think. But for now, they've taken a step towards that path by outsourcing the work.
So before I get into the building of a technology stack, let's just pull back and say we've obviously gone out and see lots and lots of clients, and we do lots and lots of investigation into technology. So what's the best piece of technology that you've seen implemented in one of our agencies over the last sort of 12, 18 months?
Do you want to go?
Let me go. So what you've been talking about so far, both of you, is that front end. So what I'd like to do is just quickly to give you an example of a back end piece. So I'm talking to a recruiter at the moment, and we're not finished this project. We're in the early stages of the project, but I've been and scoped where they are at the moment in terms of their compliance and their back office. So this is a primarily temp agency. They're putting significant numbers of contractors out and growing, and they're running all of their compliance manually out of spreadsheets. And so the team of people that they've got doing this back office compliance process is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and cannot keep on top of what's going on with their compliance, and has no visibility of the speed that it's taking to get candidates through compliance, how many of them are compliant, whether they're still compliant even they were 3 months ago. And actually I've been researching the latest technology for automating that. And we haven't decided yet which is the right piece of technology for this particular company, because we're early in this project. But the tech that is out there now in compliance and that's being built is astonishing, with that kind of building workflows to automate. And there is so much of that can be done in an automated way and will not need administrators to do it, and will give better visibility, better data protection, better churn of keeping people compliant and up to date. So bit of a boring example, I know, but definitely a cost saving, better data, better visibility.
Do you know what? You're absolutely right there, Heather, and it's not a boring example, because I'll go back to the timesheet system that we put in, because they were absolutely appalling on compliance. And what we actually did was we put the compliancy part into the timesheeting system. And so you had to supply your right to work in the UK, your contractual details that we needed, etc., etc., etc. And if you didn't put those in, guess what? You didn't get your timesheets. And guess what? Within a week of putting the system in, we were 100% compliant, because all of a sudden you affect where you affect people most in their pocket, and all of a sudden they would comply, where they've been having years and years of ringing up, can you send your contract back, can you send this back, can you do this back, can you send that back, and never been compliant. And all of a sudden, like that, compliance. And it wasn't anything to do with anyone asking or anyone being more creative. It was a piece of technology just said, we're going to stop you doing that unless you do this. And guess what? That's what they did. Paul, what you've been looking at some technology, as I have, talked about what you think your best piece of technology you've looked at.
I think the one I was most excited about was a product called LinkedIn Talent Insights, which most people will be familiar with. It used to be really expensive when they launched. It's a lot cheaper now. It's still not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than what it was. I think Talent Insights, from a being able to sit in front of your customer and present data that they will probably think is amazing and very insightful, I think is really powerful. The same data can be used from a business development perspective as well, from opening up doors. I think that is brilliant data. And in there, you can track and work out where talent works from before they get into that particular organization, where they leave that organization for. You can get into gender splits. So it's good from a DE&I perspective. You can find out which universities they went to, which cities they moved from and to. There's some brilliant, insightful data in there, which, as I said, is brilliant for service reviews and for knocking down doors. So that was one that I've used a lot. Horsefly does a similar job. So there's two platforms there that are fairly similar. I think from a LinkedIn perspective, I think Linked Helper, we've used that a little bit. RobotWorks, My RobotWorks is another one. So that's where you can reach out to many people, connect with them, and start to automate messages, but you can personalize the messages so it doesn't feel automated. Where I think the automation goes wrong with messaging people en masse is where it comes across quite sort of sterile and bland. So some of those products get around that. You can automate it. You can put timeline gaps in. You can decide when each message goes out and when the follow-up messages go out to. You can direct them back to your website. There's some brilliant technology there with those two platforms. I think from a marketing perspective, products like Force24, where you can plug into your CRM and then you can mass market and mail people. That's great for keeping in touch with candidates and connecting and keeping information flow going. And then from a data perspective, things like North Star, Cube 19, I'm quite familiar with. And this is where it's good, because with things like Cube 19 and North Star, when people come into the office in the morning and they log onto the laptop or the desktop, it can then pop up with their dashboard. So they can automatically see how many CVs they've sent out that week, what the target for the month is, how they're on track to achieve the targets for that month. So it's their sort of dashboard. And then when you sit down and do the reviews at the end of the month, it's not paper-based, it's electronic, because you're going into one of those platforms and all the data's there. So it simplifies the process and saves a bit of time. So those would probably be the ones that would stand out for me as being, if I was running a recruitment business now, I'd be looking at some of those platforms to understand if it could either generate some extra business or it could save me time.
So what we're talking about is, when I started to look at this, I knew you guys had come up with sort of back end and sort of things. I started to look at CV sifting, time management tools, marketing tools. The explosion of video has just got better and better. I also looked at how clients communicate and how multifacet is the communication with our client. And so to me, it was things that we started to send to our clients. And to me, it was about hitting the money on the head. One of the biggest areas that I thought was the biggest pain as a recruiter was reformatting and redesigning CVs that have come into you. And how many CVs would come in as a format? Some graphic designer has designed it and it just doesn't fit into a Word document, or they send it as a PDF and you want to change certain parts of it, etc. And yet there's tools now out there that can strip all that back and instantly give you a CV that is in your format, in your content, and actually works, that you can actually then send out to our client. I think the other side, I think that clients have always struggled with, and now there's simple technology to do this with, is how many times do you hear a client say, oh, I haven't got that CV. Where did you send that CV? When did you send that CV? And we know how many emails that we get. So how many emails do your clients get? And therefore what they're doing is they're getting hundreds and hundreds of emails. So no wonder some of your CVs go missing or some of your communication goes missing. And yet, if you look at, say, Microsoft Teams, you can set team groups up within your client, and therefore you have a depository of, where that information goes that clients can access straight away. And so to me, simple technology like that we see every day, but we don't use, are the things that we need to be putting into place. And I think that sort of needs back into what you were starting to talk about there, about building your technology stack, and what's the key to the success of implementing new technology. And before I sort of push it out, I'm going to give you my view of simply this. When I was at running a company, I won a Bullhorn Award for innovation. And I will be quite honest and say, I did no innovation whatsoever. All I had was the smarts to do was take Bullhorn as my CRM and then connect everything to Bullhorn. So it meant my consultants, all they had to do was get into one space and that was it. Everything would do. So if it didn't connect into my system, then I didn't engage with it, because it means that it would be going out. So when you start to implement tech, I always think the KISS methodology is absolutely the right one. Keep it simple, stupid. So if you can't work with it, then why buy it? And what I see with most techs is people go out and see the shiniest products and they buy the shiniest product in the world, and yet then they can't implement that product. And I always think about this in a simple format. When you learn to drive, they don't just throw you in a car and say, off you go. You don't need to pass a test. Just learn to drive. You spend hours in a car learning to drive, learning all the idiosyncrasies of driving. Then you have to pass a test to be able to drive on the road. And yet we give a very expensive piece of tech to somebody, give them a couple of days training, and then implement it and say, off you go, and then wonder why it fails. So the due diligence beforehand has to be huge to understand, does the tech fit what you're trying to do? But then to me, when we implement that tech stack, it is about the training and development so everyone is proficient at that tech and can use it. Otherwise, it does become a huge waste of time and a huge cost to the business, because the tech doesn't fit what the people actually want and how they use that. So it's a two-end, I think, when you're sort of implementing a tech stack. Lots of due diligence to make sure the tech is the right tech, and then massive amounts of training. And I mean huge amounts of training, not just the training they offer you, huge amounts of training on it.
Just on it works. Just on the CV bit, Howard, I'd take that one stage further, and I've seen a handful of agencies now start to market these 3D candidates. So the CV is uploaded onto something like an Odra or an interview, but it's electronic. You've then got the recruiter or the owner giving an overview of the candidate verbally, and then you've got a very short video of the candidate themselves answering, 2 or 3 questions. So it becomes a 3D view of the candidate before they've even, been brought forward or summoned to the interview. So you're representing that candidate much more. So it's using the technology and being a bit creative as well, so that you're able to, especially now being in the candidate short market, it's trying to get a higher success rate with the candidates that you're representing by pushing them out in a manner that's going to best represent them as individuals.
But that's understanding the human element at the other end. Some people won't view a video. They'd rather have a CV, as in the old-fashioned CV. Some people would rather have an email than a text, rather than have a text than an email. Some people rather a conversation, etc., etc. So it's understanding your target audience. So if you're putting into one space all of those things, then you've covered every single opportunity that the client has to view it. Because some might say, I haven't got time, I'll have a quick view of the CV, video CV. Some might say, I've got a bit more time, I want to read exactly what this candidate's been doing. And so by giving the client multiple choice of how they can access that candidate's details and whet their appetite, then you start to get a better conversation with your client and a better service. But it's about having it all in one space so they don't have to waste time trying to find it all, or you're blocking up their email passages with, you know, loads and loads of different formats of emails that come through to them. Heather?
I don't want to block up any email passages, but this for me comes back to explaining the benefits, because I wouldn't wholeheartedly agree with all those, providing you've explained to the hiring manager or your client, whoever it might be, about the benefits. So it's not just the feature, because we quite often talk about features as recruiters. We don't often talk about benefits. So it's the benefits. By using some of these platforms, you can get rid of the paper bit. And then it's explaining the benefit of getting rid of the paper bit. So I think some of what you've just talked about there is down to us and how we educate our clients.
Yeah. I wanted to come back, Howard, to the question about what's the key to success when you're selecting and implementing, and just reiterate what you were saying about due diligence, because for me, it's really important to remember when you've got tech companies coming and demoing to you, that you are talking sometimes, most often, to a salesperson, and to really challenge what you're being told. Because the goal is, as you said, keep it simple, stupid. You want an out-of-the-box solution, right? You want the best out-of-the-box solution that you need to do as little fiddling with as possible. You want out of the box, but you need to know that it really does what you're being told it does. So, you know, really challenge and question the people who are selling this and demoing this stuff to you, so that you genuinely understand what this tech does, what it's capable of, and what's involved. Because there sometimes can be a tendency to oversell and underdeliver with tech. And I would also, with the due diligence, really challenge on what about after I've bought it? So what's the follow-up? What's the support you're going to get? How are they going to support your implementation? How are they going to support your understanding and your learning and development? So that when you're thinking about your whole change project, you've got real commitment that they're just not going to disappear once you've bought that piece of tech, but they're actually there to help you continue your implementation journey, continue your change journey, and support you as you move through implementation.
I remember having that conversation with a number of tech companies, and the simple thing was, when it's sort of almost too good to be true, and they're trying to sell and upsell, etc. And I said, okay, I'm happy to buy that on one condition. You put a break clause in my contract in 3 months' time. If you haven't delivered everything that you've done, then you deliver everything back to me as it was, plus my money, etc. So back your money. And it was interesting how many suddenly started to backtrack on what they just said. Oh, well, this is in development. This isn't. So what you're saying is that you can't do what you've just told me you can do. That's a bit of a pipe dream, but you can do 80% of what you've got.
Yeah.
It's the 20% that I'm really interested in, and that's not what you can deliver to me. Thank you very much, but you're the wrong client for me, and move on. So when we start to look at that, the cradle to grave of the recruitment process, both front and back office, what should we entrust to tech, and what will always be a human function?
I think that's really interesting. Do you know, honestly, I don't know the answer, because tech is moving so fast. There are things that I would not have historically trusted to tech and didn't believe could ever be entrusted to tech, which are now entrusted to tech. And so I think that's a really difficult question, Howard. I've worked with recruitment businesses where the entire placement from start to finish doesn't have genuine human interaction. It's AI driven, and it's technology and process driven. And that only works in certain sectors with certain types of placements. And so, you know, it's not a generic thing, but I've seen that work, right? So, you know, I think it's a really difficult thing to say, this is sacrosanct and this should never be automated, because things that 5 years ago I didn't dream might be able to be automated absolutely can be. So tough question. So if we're talking right this minute, I'd have a view on the parts that, you know, the client maybe relationship pieces that are truly important. But honestly, there's nothing absolute in this at all. It's changing really fast.
Just got me thinking. I'm just wondering whether we should all be invested in robots and automating the advisory sector, Howard, and stay at home and have an easier life and just...
Yeah, no, non-exec director advice coaching is never ever going to be replaced by technology.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and Howard, we came across a piece of tech, didn't we, a couple of months ago, and this was for an industrial client whereby the work had been done upstream about assessing the candidates, putting the candidates into the technology platform, and then creating an area where the client could self-serve, right down to, you know, creating their own preferred candidates, their own preferred temps, seeing if the temp was available, searching for temps within a radius of where the location, you know, the warehouse or whatever it was based. It became all self-service from a client perspective. So I'd agree with Heather. I think anything goes. I think the bits where we'll some way off that is the things where you need to influence. So where you've got to influence candidates to, you know, you connect with them and then you've got to engage. That engaging bit is about influencing. When you're talking about, you know, trying to knock down doors from a business development perspective, you've got to get that authenticity and empathy across in how you do that. That I don't think can be automated yet, personally. But I think that, you know, might happen at some point downstream. Interestingly, and I don't know whether Heather knows this, one of the professions which is predicted to last the time that, you know, the next sort of 10 years and survive automation and everything else is actually HR. It's one of the few that is predicted to last.
Interesting.
So I think my answer to that is when I started to look at this, you know, what is it that we're going to embrace and what are we going to do, is the human interaction part. So as you said there, Paul, where you can influence human interaction, I think AI has got to the point where potentially it can, but whether it's trusted or not is a very different story. And I think when we're starting to talk about creating relationships and developing relationships and then influencing those relationships, and I think from a recruitment point of view, that would almost always be 100% human-to-human interaction. What you're talking about, though, Paul, on that piece of tech that you were outlining, was the work that they'd done in the background. So they'd already spoken to the client and spoken to the candidate, and they had both the candidates and the client understanding what was actually happening and what was there and why it was happening, and therefore the influence had happened before the placement. But I can't remember, he said he was going about 10 to 15 placements, 10 to 15% of their placements they make every week were then coming through that app and had no interaction from a sales consultant. So they were making placements as if they were asleep type scenario. But I do think that human interaction is really important. So as we push into the last question, because I think we've answered quite a bit about, you know, we've always done it this way and why we don't embrace change. I want to sort of push on, because I think this would be quite a long answer, is when implementing new technology, what's the key to ensure that you make a good return on investment? And I think that's the question about the return on investment with technology, because we've all alluded today, there's so much technology out there and the due diligence is so important. So what do you think is the key when implementing technology to get a really good return on your investment?
So I think for me, and Heather alluded to it a short while ago, I think making sure, and you did, Howard, making sure you're really clear what it is that you want the technology to do and what your expectations are, and then drilling into a service level agreement or, you know, service descriptions. That becomes the default, because I've seen so much technology implemented, and then you go back to the contract in terms of what was the contract meant to deliver, and frequently you could drive a bus through it. So it's got to be nailed within there. And again, an area where people struggle with the technology, and Howard, you'll know this better than anybody, where people struggle with the CRM provider is the service. And so making sure that service is really well documented and people have committed to service levels, whether it be account reviews or advice or influence or sharing knowledge. The technology is only as good as the people using it. And sometimes you only know what you only know. So that people bit, this is where for me, it really kicks in. So I think that documentation bit is really key. The second thing I'd just add is, with any technology, there's got to be a return on investment, right? So the question I always ask is, so how are you going to measure that return on investment? And how do we understand whether it's either freed up capacity, because that's what technology will frequently does, or it will help us increase sales? So, how do we baseline? How do we measure? What do we measure going forward? And what are the reporting metrics? So getting it right from the onset is really key, but getting those measures, looking forward once the product is live is probably the second big bit for me.
It's interesting you mentioned the CRM then, just before I jump in there, before you come in, that CRM piece. And I always say that a lot of people buy the wrong CRM because they are, they see the shiny bits and they see the nice bits, when actually what you should be looking at is what's the core piece of your business. And I know CRMs that are more perm-based, CRMs that are more temp-based, CRMs that are more contract-based, etc. And yet I walk into some clients that are doing 0 perm and all temp, but they're on the biggest perm CRM in the world because it had this flash and this flash, and then they realize they can't do everything else that they needed to do. So I say, if you're going to pick a CRM, go back and choose what are the core bases, the non-negotiables that it must have, and that is it. Then the add-ons come from there. So your documentation, Paul, is absolutely correct. Paul, Heather.
So I want to bring this back to the people. So I completely agree with everything that you're both saying about choice of technology, documentation, ROI, all of those things. But I want to bring it back to not forgetting that it doesn't matter how good your technology is if your people aren't engaged with it. And the key to that is treating the technology implementation as a change project. It's a change project. People's mindset has to change, people's behavior has to change. So when you do that, are you putting enough resource around the learning and development part of this? Are you putting enough resource around helping your managers to understand the vital role that they play in the change process? We all know about change curves and, all of that kind of stuff. Managers, absolutely crucial. Leadership, crucial to whether or not any of this implementation and change and ROI will come out at the end of it. So are you spending enough time and thought in giving your managers the skills to understand how they impact change in a positive way? Because they will absolutely be the death of a change project if they're not engaged in it and they don't have the skills to know how they support change in their people.
So I was thinking about change is absolutely right. And I always think the biggest problem with change is that you're trying to change people's habit, and people's habits are really hard to change. As anyone knows who's smoked, drunk, lose weight, etc., stop eating, etc. It's a really hard habit to change. So it's introducing new habits that usurp the old habits that is the key to change. And I think when we start to look at this, we talked quite a lot about training and development of the people, but I think it goes back to that earlier stage when you started to do the due diligence. Are you bringing in people from the shop floor that will have a look at the product, see the product, and make sure that the product works? And are you giving them a brief before they do that? Because again, they may get washed away by the shiny things rather than there. So I think when we look at the consistency, the rigor, and the challenges of certain parts of the recruitment process, we need to implement tech that will increase efficiency, eradicate error, and create time that we can then be more forward facing with our candidates and our clients, because that's where we actually make the money. And I think when we start to look at the success of ROI, what we've talked about is it going to speed up the process and give us more opportunity, or is it going to give us more opportunity to influence our end product? And I think that's when we start to sort of think about how powerful tech can be when we can enable ourselves to influence the end product, because we can influence it by our automated marketing, our automated LinkedIn updates, etc., etc., etc. But then when we start to speak to our clients, it makes it easier to influence and easier to change. So I think what we've talked about is the key to successful implementation of new technology and getting a good ROI is that due diligence at the start, making sure the tech fits your business, and then making sure that the people within the business then are trained within an inch of their lives to actually be able to use the tech properly and actually create the ROI out of that tech, rather than being just left to discover what it can do, which is in the main is what happens. You're just left to discover what it can do. And if you think about this, we're sat here on Zoom. We pay lots of money to use Zoom, and yet Zoom give very little training on how to use their product. It's all about the simplicity of Zoom. However, there are some back ends to Zoom that are quite complex. And Heather and I, we found one by mistake, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah.
We worked really hard to find them, but we found them.
But we found it, and it works really, really well. And it massively enabled parts of our audience to interact with us who were disabled, hearing problems, speech problems, etc. But we didn't know that was there, and it took us an awful long time to discover that. And yet when we asked Zoom whether they had that problem, not once did they reply to us. Not once did they say, yes, of course, we've got this, this, and this. So I think you've got to really go above and beyond to train and develop your staff in the product that you are purchasing. Guys, on tech, anything else that we want to add before we close up on tech?
No, the last thing I'd just add, Howard, is just back to what you get out of it, whether it be to realize efficiencies or to help you do things better. The one area that I see a lot of is just how we use tech to use the data to manage the people and the performance better. And I still think that in our industry is an area where we could do, the majority of people could do a lot more.
Yeah, and I think that's always been the case, hasn't it? That I remember sort of so a lot of the early CRMs were created by the accountancy division so they could track what people are doing, rather than the front division, the sales division, so it can enable you to sell more business. And I think there's been a huge shift over the last 20 years in that mindset. And I think that's the bit that we've got to think about when you start to plan your tech. What's the non-negotiables, what are the negotiables, and what are the nice to haves, and that all those non-negotiables should be all about the efficiency of the business and the sales of the business, not tracking your people, because it's how you can enable them to sell and move going forward from there. Heather, anything you want to put into that?
Just to say, this stuff moves really fast. Keep an eye on it. Keep an eye out. Join some networking groups. Talk to other people. Find out what's out there. There's some really exciting stuff, and it changes on a regular basis. Keep in touch with your tech providers when you've bought it as well. They won't automatically tell you when they've introduced a new feature. So this is fast moving, exciting, and really impactful.
I read a note when I was sort of doing some sort of research into this, and the person actually broke down and said, if your tech hasn't been upgraded in the last 3 months, you're going backwards. And I thought that was really interesting. And yet you look how much Microsoft and all the big products, how often they send updates of their tech and drive those updates into your business. They never tell you what those updates are. And that's the problem. So you never know what's actually been updated from Microsoft, but they've updated something, and that's the issue. So we need to have a little bit more due diligence of what have you updated, what's it changing, why is it changing, how can I utilize that? That becomes the bigger thing. And I think that last quote from Stuart Brand was exactly right. Once technology rolls over you, if you're no longer part of the steamroller, you're now part of the road. And I think that's really quite right, that the technology steamroller is coming, and we need to sort of work on there. So as we talk about new tech and we talk about things that are coming up, next week on the 6th and the 7th, we are at the NEC. For the Recruitment Expo. So if you're going down there is loads of new tech down there. All the new tech offerings will be there. We're there on the Thursday. Well, we're there Wednesday and Thursday, but we'll be speaking on the Thursday at 3 p.m. Paul and I will be speaking on taking on the bigger players in the recruitment market, and how as smaller recruitment agencies can make a massive dent into their big players marketplace and take lots of market share from them. So if you're coming along, come along, text us, find us. The Wi-Fi there is pretty poor, so call us if you want to meet up for a quick coffee and a chat. We'd love to see you down there.
Or buy us a beer, Howard.
Yeah, I'll have a gin.
There you go. You see, the typical recruiters. I'll put it down to alcohol. I'll put it down. Come and find us, and we can help you develop your business and work further. Maybe over a coffee, water, gin and tonic, beer, anything with hops in, and we can work from there. So next week, we are still debating whether to run a webinar on Wednesday or not, because obviously Wednesday we're down there, so it might be a bit lively, a bit hard to run a webinar, but we'll discuss that and send stuff out later. But if not, Thursday, we will be absolutely live on stage, so please come and join us. We'd be more than welcome. Gents and ladies, thank you very much for today, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.